to this celebration of the life of Rainey Taylor. Mr. Taylor was the best teacher I ever had, ever. You will hear that said several times today. And I have heard it or read it many, many times over the past 2 months in reflections by a number of his former students. The late Daniel Horston, an historian who served as the Librarian of Congress, once said, quote, "Trying to plan for the future without a sense of the past is like trying to plant cut flowers," unquote. Those of us at the Academy who had the privilege of gaining a sense of the past from Rainey Taylor were metaphorically rooted in our understanding of what came before, and thus enabled to gain a clearer perspective of the present and future. Our first reflection today will come from Mr. Kevin Morrin.
Thank you, John. I'd first like to say thanks to Mary Taylor, Rainey's daughter, who's here, who filled me in on things that I didn't know. Rainey was not my teacher, and I wish he had been. I taught with him, and it was a totally rewarding experience. Fitting it is that John B. Exline, 50-year teaching veteran, alumni scholar for the class of 1964, and holder of the Rainey Taylor Chair in History, is in charge of this celebration. A celebration of Rainey's life. John's commission to me was to briefly describe what it was like to be Rainey's colleague at the school on Nelson Road and out here. Oh, daunting task. How can one claim to be a colleague of an archangel of higher learning? There is no such MOS, military occupational specialty number, for that job. Rather, it takes an entire novitiate in an exacting seminary of learning to become worthy of college with a man like Rainey Taylor. Rainey, at the beginning, for a young teacher, was less than a colleague, than a mentor, a model of organization and accessible learning, whose standards were unimpeachable and well known. Rainey encouraged graduate work, travel, and independent scholarship for new young faculty. So collegeship wasn't really in the cards at the beginning. We didn't do the same work at the same level. Collegeship, as I said, came after a sort of novitiate. But it was a time when we were all young teachers, nourished by Rainey's generosity, his ability to help, and I have to say his wonderful sense of authority and fittingness of what an academy education was like. So what was it like teaching alongside Rainey Taylor at the Nelson Road campus and beyond? It was demanding in the best and most rewarding ways. A constant anxiety was, can I measure up? Am I equal to the task and the example of this remarkable man? Because Rainey's expertise in history bled over into other disciplines as well. He was that sort of teacher. That school of 53 years ago and more was a different world. A narrow campus between train tracks and Alumnus Creek, dominated by an old mansion full of dark tradition and secret closets. Yet, what claims the memory is the men of the Academy faculty at the upper school of all men. Two women in the upper school were Laura Eyck and Alumnus, and they were in the office. Each man, a distinct person, who was called a master. They were masters, and each represented a particular discipline, but each one had a second or even a third job. Ken Evans ran the dining room. Duke Jones ran the book room. Ken Evans, in the dining room. And Rainey ran the library. He was also a sort of glorified faculty secretary. He made up class lists. Most of the masters came from the East or had studied at Eastern colleges. Many had been in World War II or served in Korea. Rainey had been in France and Italy as a tech officer. He did not see active duty. He was deaf in one ear. In fact, I did not know until we were told. Many had also taught elsewhere or brought with them life experiences. Teaching with these men took on a distinct moral tone. Rainey's quiet gusto instilled an appreciation for excellence, not just in history, but in all disciplines. He came to represent the vivid character of the school and the worth of an academy education. And this he took with him to the new campus with the other established masters on Sheridan Road here in 1968. But let's wait a minute. We are here today because of what didn't happen. Rainey, encouraged by his lawyer father, nearly went to law school and might have joined his father's firm in Morristown, New Jersey. Accepted by Harvard Law, he deferred law school for a year to teach at Morristown Academy. But he never attended law school. He did choose teaching. He married, attended Columbia Teachers College, and that is all our gain. Hail, Rainey, hail and farewell.
Rainey Taylor was a gentleman, and he was also a very gentleman. He was the kindest teacher I think I ever had. He was without a doubt the best teacher that I ever had. And he instilled in me a urgent need for lifelong learning. I'm a very grateful person that I was the son of parents who decided that it was important to send me to the academy. I entered the 8th grade after having attended summer school to enable my acceptance in school. The 8th grade year was very difficult because the academy curriculum was so advanced with the Exlines where I had been enrolled. After my first quarter exams, I had 4 subjects: Latin, English, math, and Greek mythology. And after those first quarter exams, I had 59 averages in 3 out of the 4. And I had a 78 in Greek mythology, which was taught by Ken Evans. The average needed to pass, obviously, was 60. So I decided to arrange a meeting with Mr. Evans. I went in and I said, Mr. Evans, is it possible for me to borrow from my mythology? And put 1 each on those 50. And he started to laugh. He looked at me and he said, well, he said, you know, I can't do that. But he said, I'm not worried about you. He said, you're going to be just fine. What a great answer to a kid's question that was so preposterous. I'm sure that if I had asked 20 other people, they would have derided me in some way and put me on the wrong path. The Academy didn't do that. He also said the thing that was the most important to him. He said, Bill, you've demonstrated what we're trying to instill in all of our students, creativity. And that has stuck with me my entire life. I've made my living being a creative person. However, I have to say that in my mind, when I think of the Academy and my teachers, none stands any place close to Rainey Taylor. He taught me ancient history, ancient and medieval history, as well as modern European history. He did not teach me American history, for which I have always been very sorry, because I've been trying to catch up with that ever since. He instilled in all of his students a want-to-learn attitude. It's been part of me ever since. It started when I read Bruce Catton's The Stillness of Appomattox in my undergraduate years. It wasn't an assignment, it was a book that I just felt like I wanted to read. And it was so powerful to me. Even at that time, I remember thinking there was no way that I would ever read this. And I've not been a student of Rainey Taylor. He has had a very distinct influence on what I read, what I do for enjoyment for my entire life. A lot of the books that I have read, I would never have read without his influence. He instilled the student within me to continue to be a student, continue to learn, continue to make it my enjoyment. I've got a list of books here you're not very interested in. We have a cottage up in northern Michigan. The Stillness of Appomattox was Bruce Catton's. He won the Pulitzer for it. He was from northern Michigan. He was born in Petoskey, which is pretty close to us, but you have to go down the bay to get there. He is buried in Benzie County, in the Township Cemetery in Benzie County. And I read some time ago that he was buried there because it reminded him so much of Gettysburg. So, it's pretty close to me in Urbana. It's about 40 minutes away. My wife Paul and I belong to a couples golf group. We go to a different place to play golf every year. And there are 9 couples that are members, and arrangements are passed around on a succeeding basis. And we decided that it was our 50th anniversary year, and we decided that we would arrange the golf group to go down to the Tides End, where we had celebrated our honeymoon. It's in Irvington, Virginia. And we always do something educational on the way to these golf trips, planned by the couple that's in charge of the plan. That year, we decided to go by Gettysburg. And it's the first time that I had ever been to Gettysburg in my life. And I soon, after that, read that Bruce Catton had decided to be buried in Benzie County Cemetery. It reminded him so much of Gettysburg. I drove down, believe it or not, I drove down there to Bruce Catton's grave to see him. And the only reason I was ever down there was because of Rainey Taylor. And it really doesn't matter much how much I look like Gettysburg. It was that a great historian
5 questions, and you better be ready. And I would spend the first 2 hours of my studying every night preparing for that 5-question quiz. And I want to tell you, if he did not give us a quiz, I was crushed. Not because I'd spent 2 hours reading the material, but because I wanted to know the 5 questions. I wanted to know what the 5 questions should have been on that day's assignment. But what a great discipline. And we talk about college preparation, that's what the academy is all about. Rainey was our first college professor, and he was my first college professor, without a doubt. And I've got a good story from Mike Crane on that. And now that I know I'm being filmed, I'm leaving out Mike's punchline. Because it's a little colorful. But unless you want to turn the camera on. Just an anecdote about one of my freshman roommates at Harvard coming back from his first history exam, quoting the roommate now. "Oh my God, it wasn't a multiple choice test. It was an essay test. And they actually asked you why certain events happened." Then Mike says, "I was shocked. I told him we rarely, if ever, had multiple choice tests in history, that our teacher, Mr. Taylor, gave us essay tests, always teaching us the whys and wherefores of history." He was our first college professor. And boy, Mike, glad he didn't go to Harvard Law School. Another thing I remember about Rainey was the poor guy wrote practically everybody's college recommendation. Now, why was that? Because of his stature. Everybody looked up to him and thought, wow, what he has to say is going to have some weight on my college admissions report, okay? But Rainey Taylor probably wrote more college recommendations than anybody in the history of the academy, because practically everybody in my class, he was the #1 guy you asked to write your recommendation. As far as preparation for college, I've talked about the story from Mike Crane, but half of our class, and according to, I think it was George Bound at graduation, over half of our class of 71 for context, scored 800 on the U.S. achievement test, the U.S. history achievement test. Over half the class. Now, Dustin McCreary told me that story and said, wow, how did you remember that? And he said, well, they announced it at graduation. I must not have been paying attention. But what I do remember is that I didn't get an 800. I was in the bottom half of my class. But I do know that not only half got 800 on the U.S. history achievement, and I don't know if that's ever done in any other subject or by any other teacher, but the AP test, the true college prep test, practically everybody got a 5. I mean, it was, you were considered dumb if you didn't get a 5 on the U.S. history AP test, the highest score you could get. And I know that when I went on to college, I did major in history because of Mr. Taylor's influence. And one of the history requirements was taking American history, which I did not take. I had my AP test to waive out of it because I thought there's no way I'm going to get a better history, lesson than what I got in high school. So thank you, Rainey, for getting me out of the American history requirement in college. My best and longest, and this is a little unusual, but my longest interpersonal contact with Mr. Taylor was after high school. I was doing the backpack tour of Europe, and this was in 1973. And I was in the Piazza San Marco in Venice. And if you know that, it's a very large, open public square. And in July, I can tell you it's very crowded. There are tourists everywhere. It's packed. You're having trouble making it through the crowd. And I was with my 2 college friends looking terrible, I know, because I hadn't shaved in probably a month and hadn't washed in probably 3 days. I'm doing the backpack thing, right? And up comes Mr. Taylor and says, "Tom, how are you?" And I thought, what? First of all, how did you recognize me? But Rainey looked like the tourist. He had, might have been a safari hat or some kind of a hat for the sun, to keep the sun off. He's got the camera draped around his neck, just like people used to before iPhone. But he stood there in the hot sun for 30 minutes quizzing me about what I'd done on my backpack trip. And I had not talked to him that long in my entire academy career. But here we were in Europe, in Venice, and he wanted to know everything I'd done, which I didn't want to tell him most of it. But I gave him the highlights, not the lowlights. But he was really interested, and I always remembered that when I saw him at alumni events. I would always mention that it was really neat that he came up and actually spotted me in the crowd, because I would have recognized him with the safari hat on, first of all, but he came up and recognized me looking nothing like I looked like in academy, with a jacket on and clean shaven and my haircut probably. But the thing that stood out the most to me was Rainey Taylor never raised his voice, ever. I challenge anybody to remember one time when he yelled at students. And that stood out because I had Mr. Beck and other teachers, I don't want to name names, but they raised their voice more than once. Rainey never had to. There was something about him that you walked in that room and it was all business. And there was no screwing around. There were no pranks. There was no BS. There was just American history. That's what I had Rainey Taylor for. So when I think back to my academy experience, and like Bill, I was a Exline transplant, that's what kind of changed me in my academic career, was the seriousness of the business of education, and Rainey was all business. When you walked into his room, you knew why you were there and what you were supposed to be doing. And I am really glad he did not go to Harvard Law School. Thank you.
John, really appreciate you asking me to do this. I'm back from my 40th reunion, and I think about all the great teachers we had, and I'm looking around the room, and half of them are here. So, Coach S, Coach Staller not here, Coach Exline, Coach Staller, Coach Morrin, Coach Moody, I saw that, Mike, Mr. Dietrich, and Rainey Taylor, Mr. Clark. Those are some great teachers, but Rainey Taylor was surely one of the best teachers we ever had. We had our reunion last night. We were talking about, who are the great teachers, and everybody brought up Mr. Taylor as being such a great teacher for us, and he was just extremely prepared. Yeah, he knew the subject, but he really expected a lot from us and demanded a lot from us, and we delivered. And we just didn't want to let him down. I'm thinking about, too, he was just a great mentor. And I know he didn't go to law school, but he probably had a bigger impact just teaching history, because he developed so many lawyers here at the academy. He made history come alive. He got his students really passionate about history. I talked to, my brother, who said he went to Duke, and he majored in history because of Mr. Taylor, the seeds he planted. Another best man of mine, Jim Hughes, his attorney, said, hey, he taught me so much information in history, and he taught me what's important, what's not. And I do that every day. And he's, majored in history in college, and then became a lawyer. He goes, the foundational skills that he taught me were here at the academy. And you think about all the lawyers that he, produced, who ended up majoring in history and being lawyers. Myself, at West Point, I was thinking about being a lawyer, and they take the top 2% of the class to go to law school. And in fact, the head of the law department introduced me to Justice Morrin at a football practice. One time he was up watching practice, and he said, hey, this guy thinks he wants to go to law school, but he's going to be a better Army officer. So I think we'll have him be an infantry officer rather than law. a lawyer, but you know, I even consider being a lawyer. So just had a huge impact on so many people. And for me, you know, just looking at those pictures, he was just a true gentleman. You know, he just commanded respect. He demanded respect. You know, the way he dressed, I just looked up to him so much. And for me, it's just a privilege to be here. So he had a huge impact on my life. I'm grateful that he was one of my teachers, and you know, he'll be missed. So thank you very much.
I had the privilege of having Rainey as a teacher for ancient medieval history, for modern European history, and for U.S. history. So I had 3 years in a row, my sophomore, junior, and senior year. And I think about him, obviously, when I teach. And Barbara Tuchman, the author of Guns of August and other excellent history, said that the secret of teaching history is to tell stories. And that is what Rainey Taylor did. He didn't just lecture. He told us stories that allowed us to understand the people and the events that shaped the world we lived in. And in so many instances, those of us who had the privilege of learning from Mr. Taylor, as you have heard, have continued to read those stories throughout our lives after school. We received a number of reflections from former students of Rainey, and I'd just like to go through a few of them. First of all, several from my class, the class of '64, Charlie Williams. I remember asking him once in class, does the Constitution allow the violent overthrow of the government, since that's how we got our republic from the British? He didn't say no, but only answered that it was a good question. And of course, he smiled when he answered. Though I went on to study English in college and then on to law school in later years, I have become a history geek. My last conversation with him was at my 50th class reunion. He was in attendance at the school function at our request. I could not help mentioning to him that I had become immersed in ancient and Roman history because of his inspiration. When I told him I had read all of Livy, his eyes lit up and he smiled that smile he was known for. I think he loved the notion that even after such a long time, one of his kids had been hooked on the same love of history he had. And from Fred Summer, also from the class of '64. One particular teaching experience I remember is when Rainey discussed socialism. Most of us probably did not even know what socialism really was, unless we had built in class. First, he made us think of its advantages, which actually sounded pretty good. Then he made us think about its disadvantages, particularly the lack of competition, which fosters growth and innovation. I learned from that experience not to accept things at face value, but rather analyze them carefully before reaching a conclusion. And Dan Friedman, also from the class of '64. Over the years, I've thought of Mr. Taylor a lot. I wrote a term paper for him on Japanese-American internment in World War II. It changed my life. I'd like to think the warmth and encouragement that Mr. Taylor communicated to us as students had an effect on how I approached my own teaching. Class of '57, Dick Lacey said, I still recall learning for the first time how to study purposefully, and those lessons have stuck to this very day, decades later. Bill Millard, class of '76. Mr. Taylor had a vast influence on all of us at Academy and earned absolutely everyone's respect. He was everything a teacher should be: super intelligent, unshakably dignified, formidably knowledgeable, unfailingly dedicated, free from partisan or ideological biases, and scrupulously fair to one and all. He had high standards and demanded a lot of us. There were people in our modern European history and American history class who viewed his morning pop quizzes and more comprehensive exams with foreboding, as if 5 factual questions on the chalkboard were a worrying dental drill, or a longer essay trip to the Somme in 1918. And at the same time, he made it abundantly clear why it was worth some hard work on our part to rise to such standards. One emerged from a couple of semesters in his presence as a different person, both smarter and wiser. Bill continues, history as we came to understand it from Mr. Taylor's classes was neither a storehouse of disconnected details for memorization, nor a series of frothy encomia to inflate the reputations of undeserving or abominable great men. History was the living context that adds meaning and gravity to everything we do, observe, consider, and communicate. Rainey Taylor never backed away from the challenges of increasing our comprehension of it. He treated us with rigor and respect as adults in formation, regardless of our culture's tendencies to immerse young people in the superficial, the prepackaged, and the meretricious. Stephen Fireman, class of '84. Rainey Taylor taught me to read more carefully, write more clearly. Most importantly, he taught me to believe in myself, that I had the skills to succeed both at the academy and in life. As you recall, I was a scrawny high school kid with mediocre skills across the board, but my success in learning in Rainey's classes showed me that I could truly excel. We all recall he was not a rah-rah type of teacher, but when you worked diligently in his class, he had that way of instilling a quiet confidence in his students that has served me well throughout my professional career. I did have the opportunity upon graduation to thank him. The only reply was to look him in the eye and tell me, "Thank yourself, Stephen, thank yourself." We shook hands on that warm spring day in 1984, and that was the last time I saw him, but he will ever be a part of me. Steve also mentioned that his first child's first stuffed toy's nickname was Rainey Taylor. Steve Prout, class of '68, said, "A quick story. I sat behind David Shawn in one of Mr. Taylor's history classes. About halfway through the year, I got a bit miffed at how David, one of my best friends, would turn in a piece of paper on a pop quiz that only had 10 half lines of answers and always seemed to get A's. I would have pages of lots of details and receive B-minuses. One day I stayed after class for a minute and approached him about what I was doing wrong. He said, "Steve, I never thought you would ask, but I'm glad you did so." He said, "David answers the questions with only what is necessary. Be concise and read the questions searching for the one word that would answer them." I asked him what he meant, and he changed the way I read things and heard things and went about my life. I started getting A's on my tests, not only in his classes, but in all my subjects. He taught me how to learn, a gift I have used my entire life since that day in 1967. That is why I consider him the greatest teacher I ever had. A couple others, one from Bill Carlisle, class of '69. To me, he was not only an excellent history teacher, but also a shaper of young people to become active citizen participants in democracy. He took that role seriously and carried it out very well. Andy Krakoff. To me, more important was his quiet and warm disposition. I never heard him raise his voice to anyone, and for my part, I'm sure I gave him multiple opportunities. His discussion of the New Deal has always resonated with me as he articulated in his own understated way the importance and value of our government to address the needs of our citizens and society at large. I feel so fortunate that he was my teacher. Harold Coder, class of '74, erudite, thoughtful, and demanding. He was an outstanding teacher who left an indelible mark. He instilled a lasting fascination with the rich history of my country and a love of his ideals. John Searing, class of '74, his impact was long-lasting from my entering Kenyon College with a credit in U.S. history based on my performance on the AP exam. Who would have known? 2 years later, when I moved to New York City and successfully bid on a lithograph of a cardinal done by Mark Catesby, a predecessor of Audubon's, one line in our text and a brief discussion led by Mr. Taylor in our U.S. history class gave me all the information I needed. It is still a prized possession of mine. Brooke Bethel, class of '81, he nurtured my interest and respect for history with his direct approach, done in an understated, insightful manner. A true gentleman. I still have all the papers I wrote in his classes. And from Craig Miller, class of '83, Mr. Taylor was the best. Everyone loved him. Here's a story. Once when he read aloud to the class about the ritual killing of British Colonel Crawford by the Indians, memorably related in the Frontiers movie, as Mr. Taylor read on and the details became more and more graphic and disturbing, one of my classmates literally passed out and slowly sank out of his chair to the floor. I think Mr. Taylor stopped reading that story. And the last one from Ivan, class of '86. Mr. Taylor had a gift of focusing on seeming footnotes that were more presciently relevant than the greatest hits version of history that seems ascendant today. When I was 17 in 1985, in addition to Yorktown and Gettysburg and Versailles and Hiroshima, Mr. Taylor guided us through topics like Eugene Debs, William Jennings Bryan, the XYZ affair, and Seneca Falls, the Alien Sedition Act, the T-Bot Dome and the Pullman strike, and Fletcher versus Peck and Dred Scott, and Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act, and Roy Cohn and Joe Welch. For years, a required book in this class was Richard Hofstadter's The American Political Tradition, a book I still love to pick up. It was all challenging and enlightening and rigorous and true. And as the kid of immigrants to this country, I was always fascinated with U.S. history and our place here. Mr. Taylor's classes were an impeccable training for America. Pulitzer Prize-winning author David McCullough once said, and I quote, "The task of teaching history is infinitely complex and infinitely seductive and rewarding. And one of the truths about history that needs to be portrayed is that nothing ever had to happen the way it happened. History could have gone off in any number of different directions, in any number of different ways, at any point along the way. You never know. One thing leads to another. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Actions have consequences. These all sound self-evident, but they're not self-evident, particularly to young men and women trying to understand life," unquote. And that is the true gift of having Rainey as a teacher. He enriched our opportunity to understand life. Mary Taylor will say a few words, or this is Rainey's daughter, Mary.
My sisters and I would like to thank everyone, particularly Fred Lindbergh, Melissa Soderberg, John Exline, all the speakers, guests and alumni. This is an awesome tribute to my father. Dad's history chair is a lasting legacy, and all the gifts have been amazing and heartwarming. It's been a challenging year, so please do what is up there. His individual collective accomplishments are many, and his generosity and kindness was unlimited. Sorry. The respect for every person and his or her own accomplishments was exemplary. With the inevitable going through pictures and papers of our parents, I found a 3-page document typed by Dad in 1977. There was no title or indication of what prompted Dad to write it. So I characterized it as his personal reflections on his teaching career, and I thought it fitting to share some of his insights with you today. So in his words, and I hope he doesn't mind sharing this, he was a very private person, but here goes. Yeah, these are his words. "My greatest satisfactions have come from the classroom experience. It is good to expect more of a student than he expects of himself. Given the number of students who have majored in history in college and pursued history-related occupations, one could truly feel that perhaps you did create an interest and stir some curiosity. There is no greater satisfaction than when students who have been categorized as mediocre suddenly find success under your influence. Each year seems to produce at least one. My students are aware that all assigned paperwork is correct and returned the next day. I cannot expect them to do work without doing my share under the same standards I set for them. High standards have been set by me. The students accept these goals, and to my satisfaction in most cases, try to meet them. It's good to expect a bit more of a student than he expects of himself. As for discipline, I've had relatively few problems over the years because my students appreciate my sensitivity and respect for them as individuals and their dignity at this stage in their lives. My success in the classroom, I attribute to hard work, conscientious preparation, a deep abiding interest in history that is constantly reinforced by my personal reading, thorough course preparation, a sense of fairness, a respect for each individual's worth, and personal honesty in all my relationships. I deferred my acceptance to Harvard Law School so I could try teaching. 1 year's efforts convinced me I had found what I wanted to do. If I had to do it all over again, I would change very little. After 30 years of school life, it is perhaps a realization that comes to one my age that the years are getting fewer and there are so many things still to do. Each day I seem to want to guard for myself, and its preciousness is more apparent. I hope when I retire I'll be remembered by all as a good teacher who was conscious of the words of Henry Adams. A teacher affects eternity. He can never tell where his influence stops. I'm grateful, still his words, I am grateful to have been associated with understanding and friendly colleagues as well as challenging students. A teacher can ask for a little more.